Hey guys, in this video, we're going to be going over React.js, the most trending UI library that's out there right now. But before we get started, please subscribe to this channel and please like and comment. I really want to be able to get feedback, and also whatever addresses or concerns that you guys have, I will address, okay? Awesome, let's get started. Okay, well, now what is React? And the way to think about it is it's like a front-end JavaScript library, all right, where you can build UIs. And UI is a term you'll hear a lot in the Valley and even when you're in the developer ecosystem. And that just means user interfaces. All right, whenever a user interface is designed, it always has some engineering to it, right? Like where the elements are placed, where things are in the whole page. So, React is the best when it comes to like making that deliberate thought process of where these elements will go, right? And it's jam-packed with features that are just important to developers, right? One is you're able to create responsive web pages. You got people with all sorts of phones, man. You still got people with the Blackberries. You still got people with the old Nokia phones, right, in Asia. And just in general, people have all sorts of phones with different viewport sizes. And React just makes it a lot easier to adapt to each of these sizes, right? Like when you're in HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, just traditional, right? It's going to be hard to be like, okay, when it's this size, how should I render? When it's this size, how should I render? React just makes it very easy to do that. All right, there's also faster load times. There's an innovation in the library called the virtual DOM. And you can think of this virtual DOM like a copy of the original DOM that re-renders every time there's a change in the DOM. So it just makes the load time a lot faster. Okay, we're going to talk about this more. And then it's a declarative component based, right? So declarative is a programming paradigm, and it's also component based. So everything is boiled down to components, right? A very complex component that is very, complicated in design is actually just a bunch of components put together. So it's very easy to, understand the fundamental building blocks of the component. Yeah. And it's developed by Facebook engineers, right? Hands on deck. And it's just been a complete game changer. And, the other two frameworks, Vue and Angular, honestly weren't able to catch up to where React is going. Okay? Awesome. All right, so what's a component? And I mentioned this earlier, but the component is just the fundamental building block of React. All right, so, kind of like how a brick is a fundamental building block of a building. Same thing, right? So a component is a fundamental building block of a complex web page. And the UI can be split up into independent pieces, right? Or independent components. So, you may have like Facebook, right? There will be a post component. There will be a search bar component. There will be a sidebar component, So it's kind of like you're doing a bird's eye view and you're just seeing, okay, these are the different components. All right. And just think of like a machine or function, right? As a component. Well, the component takes in data as inputs and it outputs what should appear on the screen. Okay. So this is an example what I'm talking about. Let's say you have a component container.js and content a.js, right? And you're not able to see this, but content a has an export at the bottom, and you'll see this one, container as an export at the bottom. So this just means that, okay, I finished building the component. Now I can export it so that others can use it. So what's going on here is the container and content a are in two separate, areas, right? They're not really connected at all, but they're exported, and the same file, index.js, is importing both of them. So what index.js can do is it can actually have content A and container and render them on the screen. So that's the whole cool thing about React, is that you can have files living in different like folders or something like that, even in the same folder, and the index will be able to render it, import it, and then render on the screen. Okay, great. This is an example of the React syntax. I'm going to highlight some very important things here. Okay, so first of all, notice how we're saying class, right? So, class-based system, right, in coding. And also notice the extends keyword. So if you know anything about programming, you know about the object-oriented principle design, right? And extends refers to inheritance, all right? So when I'm extending something, that means that I'm inheriting from a higher order component. And what is that higher order component? React.component. All right, so React.component is the higher order component that I'm extending from. Okay, so keep this in mind because I'm going to definitely mention this in the next video. Okay, now we have a constructor, right? The constructor is where you initialize your variables. It's the same thing here. The super word is very, very, very important. This is where I'm actually instantiating the constructor, or invoking, sorry, the constructor of the React component class. So please keep that in mind. This is a very important line. And I don't expect you to know React code. I'm just going over the everything so that you're familiar with how it looks. All right, these are JavaScript methods like this.toggle equals this.toggle.bind this, right? So the toggle will be a method that the class will use. And then in the constructor, there's always a state. And the state, we're going to go over this, but the state is like what variables you should keep track of in the component. All right, now toggle, look what this does. All it does is it changes the show variable to be the negation of the value. So it'll go from false to true to false to true to false to true, because the negation of false is true, right? And the negation of true is false. So it just negates the value. Okay, and then the render is basically how to render the component, right? So typically you'll have JSX in this method, lifecycle hook. That's the formal term. And yeah, it's just it's basically the syntax for how to render the component on the screen. So yeah, render and constructor are probably the two most important lifecycle hooks in any component. But this is just a brief, overview. We're gonna get more into the details in future videos. Okay. Awesome. So now let's talk about props. So props are basically like when you have a component that has a component in it, right? Like an example is like this one. Index.js has both content A and container, right? Oftentimes index.js wants to pass data into, content A and container. And then all container and content A will do is just render them cosmetically, okay, with good CSS and HTML. Right, so that's exactly what props is. You're just passing down data to from a parent to the child component. And ideally, you don't want to manipulate the data in the children. You just want the data to be read only, right? So it should be immutable. And yeah, don't modify. So here's what's okay. You shouldn't change data or modify the var values, right? So return A plus B, that's fine because you're not actually changing A or B or like what's in it. But like if you have something like c.total equals A plus B, well, you're actually changing the C, C field value, which is not good when it comes to props. So props are just passing down, you don't want to like change them. You can change them in the component, like the outer component, right? So like, for example, in index, if you want to change some data, whatever, manipulate it in some way, then pass it down to container content A, that's perfectly fine. But you don't want to pass it to content A or container, and then these change it in some way. That's actually not good practice, okay? So awesome. And now state is very important. The way you want to think about it, it's like the internal state of a component. So like what variables do you need to keep track of for this component? Let's go over two examples, like a traffic light, right? You want to keep track of, red, yellow, or green, right? Like should red be turned on, should yellow be turned on, or should green be turned on? Or if you have like a counter with a number, you should have like a increment or decrement method that manipulates the state of the counter value, right? So these kind of things. Okay. All right, so now let's talk about virtual DOM. So if you've coded in HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, you know that DOM manipulation is a problem, right? It's very slow, and developers have really tried to solve this problem of DOM manipulation. So Facebook engineers really came up with a good solution called the virtual DOM. And it's basically the copy of the DOM, but it has inbuilt diffing algorithm that's based on depth first search, right? Depth first search is a graph traversal algorithm that can really search through graphs, and the DOM is basically a graph if you think about it, and find a certain node in reasonable time, right? And yeah, it basically has that, and it only re-renders when the state changes. So the virtual DOM always makes sure to have the latest copy of what's on the page, okay? And it's inbuilt, so you're never going to engineer the virtual DOM. It's inbuilt into the library. Awesome. All right, now let's go over JSX. JSX is just a JavaScript extension and allows us to combine JavaScript and HTML. So you can have like the conditionals that JavaScript offers and mix them with HTML. This is probably one of my favorite things about React. When you use like Ruby or like other frameworks, you have to use like, I personally don't like it. You have to use like a curly bracket and like these kind of different things that, I guess it may appeal to certain people, but to me, I personally don't like it. But JSX is really, really good. You can combine the conditionals of JavaScript and merge them with your HTML. So for instance, if you want to do the traffic light component, and let's say all of a sudden, you're somehow keeping track of the time that cars are flowing on a road, and the time has passed. A lot of time has passed. So you can have like a if loop, if condition that says, okay, if the time threshold has passed, make the traffic light yellow, and then make it red after like 3 seconds, right? So JavaScript allows you to JSX allows you to combine JavaScript and HTML, and it really makes conditional rendering a breeze. Okay, so I really like JSX, and I know you will too when we start coding. Okay, I'm gonna end it with the benefits. So why should you know React? Well, there's a high salary, right? You can earn like above 100K if you really show that you know the framework to the recruiters and your employers. Okay, it's fast, it's efficient. It's not like typical HTML, CSS, and JavaScript that's too vanilla and kind of slow. And it's easier to code logical-based code thanks to JSX, right? It's also inbuilt with the dev tools, so it works with Google Chrome's console log or source. Same with Internet Explorer and Firefox. So I really recommend this. You definitely should have this on your resume. And even if you're in college, if you can show that hey, I've built a lot of projects in React.js, I guarantee you're gonna get an internship like that next summer. Okay, so that's all there is to it for this video. I'll see you in the next one. All right, bye.